I can add with negatives and positives. So in the past, we only added with positives, but now we'll include the negatives there. That's it. All right, so similar to using positives and negative tiles like this, what you'll have is you may have like lots of them, and if the tile thing helps you out, then use it. It can become kind of difficult when you look at like large values, right? Like no one really wants to put in 56 positives and then negative 76 negatives like that, okay? But if you can understand that what's happening is that we're zeroing out values as we go, then we can understand, at least if there's opposites like this, that subtraction is what is actually being used, not addition. Now, you can have regular addition, such as just having a positive, like this one, and just taking it and then adding it to other positives. So this would be like 2 plus, we'll do 2 plus 3. Okay, so addition just means I'm going to combine these all together. And when I do, if I were to combine these all together, I would get 5 total, right? I got 5 positives total. But what will happen is that they're going to take, I don't know, 3 like this, and then they're going to combine it with, I don't know, 4 negatives. Like this. So the way this will read on the assignment would be something like 3, and then we're adding these together with 4 negatives, okay? But once again, every negative and positive together is going to zero itself out. So I could take that positive and this negative. I'm crossing them out, but it's really a 0 that's happening right there. Same with this second positive with this second negative, and then this third positive with this third negative. You can do negatives and then positive, it doesn't really matter. But what I see in the end is this final negative that's left over. So overall, it has a value of -1. Okay, but this crossing out stuff represents what really is subtraction. What am I subtracting? Well, you're just taking these positives and then subtracting those negatives. Well, you're subtracting that amount of negatives. So it's really like 3 minus 3 right there. And then those 3 negatives is the -3 with the 3 positives. So you had more negatives than positives, okay? And that's the way that it works, at least the way that I do it. Now, do you have to do it the way that I do it? Of course not. But the first thing we can do when we look at a addition problem with opposite signs, positives and negatives, is just determine which of the two we have more of. Because if you look at down here, like this problem right here, I have more negatives here is the -4 than the 3 positives, whether you use a modeling situation like that or not. But I can see that I have more negatives than positives, so when I combine them, my answer should still be negative, but these 3 positives are going to, I'll say, cancel out, even though I don't like it. These 3 positives will cancel out those 3 negatives, and you're just left with the 1, which is why really what we did was 3 minus, well, it would be 4 minus 3 to get 1, and that's where that 1 comes from. That's what this is saying. If the signs are opposites, meaning positive and negative, then what you end up with is you got to figure out which of them you have more of. Do you have more positives or do you have more negatives? Because if you know that, then you can know the sign first. You will know the sign of the answer. Once you know the sign of the answer, since they're opposites, they're going to be subtracting from each other because they're going to be zeroing out each other. So you take the big number, whichever it is, positive or negative, and then you subtract the smaller number, whichever that is, positive or negative. And then it says sum, I guess. But yeah, that equals the final sum, just attached with whatever the sign was that you started with. So that's the order that I tend to do it in. What is the sign of my answer? And then what is the actual numerical part of the answer? Because if I can figure out the sign, then it's just a matter of subtraction. Now keep in mind, this is only for opposites. Just like it is for positives, which we've seen. If you see that you're adding the same signs, then what you do is you just combine them together. But whatever the sign is of the two numbers, that's what the sign is of the answer. Okay, so on this problem, let's make it a little bigger. On this problem, I'm going to find the sum between -25 and +8. Well, like I said, on this problem, I got more negatives than positives, which means that my answer is going to be negative, automatic. They are opposite signs. They're negative and positive, so I just need to figure out which one I have more of. That's what my answer will be in terms of the sign. Okay, now again, since they are opposites as well, I'm going to take the bigger of the two numbers, which is just 25. And then those 8 positives are going to take away 8 of the negatives, which is why we do subtract right here. And this will tell me how negative the final sum is. So right here I do 15 minus 8, which is 7. Drop the 1, and we get 17. So my final answer is negative 17 right there. So again, hopefully it makes sense why this is negative, because these 8 positives will only cancel out 8 of the negatives, but by canceling out, that means we have to subtract right there. Okay, 4 plus negative 321. Now it's in parentheses. That's just, you'll see this often where when we operate with negatives, they'll be in parentheses. That's just so we don't get that confused with a subtraction sign, because subtraction, it actually does kind of represent negatives, but that's a whole story. So try this one out, see how you do. Okay, so on this one, once again, the negative is much bigger than the positive, which means that my answer will definitely be a negative. So there's my negative sign. Okay, they are opposite signs. So I'm going to take the big number, which is the 321, and I will subtract the smaller number, which is 4. And this will tell me how negative my answer is. So make that 11 minus 4, which is 7. Drop the 1, drop the 3, and we end up with a negative 317. That's it. Now, if we add with the same sign, which I already talked about, if we're adding and the signs are the same, whether it's positive or negative, keep the sign of the two values and then just add the two values. That's it. Okay, so again, if we can focus on operating and just think, okay, what is my answer going to be? Is it going to be positive or negative? Just think of the sign of the answer, and then we can kind of figure out where to go from there in terms of operation. But now notice that we're adding and not subtracting, because if you were to take a negative and add it to another negative, the answer is just going to be more negative. More means bigger negative. And the same is true for positives. If you take a positive and add it to another positive, your answer will be positive, but it will be more positive instead. This goes back to Unit 1, because this is no negatives on this one. So all we're doing is adding by place value. Now again, if we went through our process there, both of these values are positive, so some students like to put the positive sign like that, whatever, just so you know it's positive, right? But then you can take the two values, 987 and also 65, and then all you got to do is add by place value, right? So in the ones place value, 7 plus 5 is 12, carry the 1. 1 plus 8 is 9, plus 6 is 15, carry the 1. 1 plus 9 is 10. So it is positive. We have the positive sign already, but it's positive 1,052. In the end, though, I'll just circle it without the positive sign, because we would not want to type that in to our answer. Okay, now this is a good exercise because they have the same sign, right? If these two were negative, the only thing that would change, this process would be the same, but instead of this being positive, it would have been a negative 1,052. That's it. Okay, so negative 19 plus negative 82. Try this one out. Take 30 seconds, try it out, then we'll go over it. Yeah. Here we got a negative plus another negative, so of course our answer will be negative as well. But it's going to be more negative, so we got to take the two values of 19 and 82, and we just got to add them together. That will tell us how negative the answer is. 9 plus 2 is 11, carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 8 is 10. So negative 101. That's how negative the answer is when you take negative 19 and add it to negative 82. So addition problems with many terms. So just keep in mind, yeah, I mean, you can use the commutative property if you'd like, but really look at two numbers at a time and then you go from there. So you can associate problem, I don't know. I'm not huge on the commutative stuff or the associative stuff, but you can. Some students like to move all the negatives next to each other and then they like to move all the positives next to each other, combine all those, and then combine those last two numbers. It's up to you. And then again, in associative property, I mean, it doesn't matter which two you combine at a time, whatever, you get to choose. So since these should all be addition problems, because this is addition of integers, remember just order doesn't matter, and then whichever two you want to combine at a time, that's the associative property right there. All right. So on a problem like this, again, is it possible that you can just combine all the negatives and then finally combine it with all the positives? You can. But I would just recommend going from left to right myself. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, do you have to do it? No, you do not. But I'm going to start with first -3 plus -5, which means as of right now, I'm ignoring all this stuff right here. Two at a time, okay? So -3 plus -5. They're both negative, so my answer will be a negative. They're the same signs, so I take the 3 and the 5 and just add them together to get 8. That's how negative that would be. Now I can slide this over and look at the next value. So from that -8, I'm going to also add this -7. Just two at a time. -8 plus -7, they're both negatives, so my answer will be a negative. And then since they're negatives, we're going to add the two values together. 8 plus 7, which is 15. That's how negative the answer is. Now, going to the next value, that would be -15 plus 19. And when I combine these two, they're opposite signs now. So I see my -15 is smaller than my positive 19. So my answer will be a positive. Whether you put the positive sign there or not is up to you. But since they're opposites, the 19 positives, the 15 negatives are going to take away 15 of the 19 positives, and I would be left with 4 positives from that combination. And then, yeah, only one value left. So next we're going to add, I did not expect this to happen, but they're opposite signs, but there's neither more positives or negatives, which means that this is a zero pair. 4 positives will zero out 4 negatives, and we just end up with 0. It's not normal that that happens, but it does happen from time to time. So this one we have 2 positive values and then a negative value. And it doesn't matter which one you do first, but here's what I notice is I have 2 positive values that I can combine if I'd like to. So that means I would take the 25 and the 50 and combine those. Okay, now what I've just done there is I've kind of used the commutative property. I just didn't actually move them close to each other, which is okay. So when I add those together, 5 plus 0 is 5, 2 plus 5 is 7. So when I combine those, that's 25 right there. I don't know why that erased. But just my positives is positive 75. But then I also have, which I need to add the negatives to that. So that's a negative 38. Now if there were more negatives, I could have combined those to get whatever the negative number is. But the way it is, I only had 2 positives to combine. So I've got 75 plus negative 38. When I combine these, I can see that I have more positives than negatives on this particular problem, which means my answer will be negative. I'm sorry, it will be positive instead. But again, how positive will it be? Well, you take the 75, those 38 negatives are going to cancel out 38 of the positives, which is why we subtract. That's going to be 15 minus 8, I borrowed, to be 7. 6 minus 3 then is 3. And I end up with positive 37. So addition with number lines, because we're going to have to do this on the assignment. So addition moves to the right on the number line. It's just if you're adding a negative, then it's really telling you to go opposite of the operation. That doesn't have to make sense right now because we'll look at that more with subtraction. But when you see this, the first number tells you where to start. Now on the assignment, that means it's the bottom one. It has to be the bottom one. If you try to switch these, it will mark it wrong. So be careful on that. The bottom one is your starting value. And then you can figure out the direction from the second value and then how far. And also the operation as well. We'll have to keep that in mind. So the first number tells you where to start. The second number tells you how far to go. The operation will tell you which direction. So the direction for us is always plus, but it's adding a negative, which when we add a negative, it will be to the left on a number line, which is why sometimes it gets a little confusing because it's like, I thought plus was to the right. Well, that's true, but remember, negatives are to the left, which is why we end up going to the left. Line below to represent the expression -1 plus -5. Now, when you do this, you're going to take that to the bottom one. That's our starting one. And I've got to put it on -1, right? So there's my -1 right there. And that means I would have moved the bottom dot right there. Now, when you do that as well, it's going to move this one over. But notice I'm adding -5, okay? So adding -5 is actually going to mean that I'm going to end up going to the left, okay? Because addition is positive, but the negative really tells us to go opposite of the negative. Tells us go opposite of right, which is left. So this one, it would be to the left 5. That's what the negative is right there. So I'd have to go to the left 5 on the top there. So I would start here, and then I'd move it 1. I'll do jumps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can see that is right on cue there with -6. And so this is that's where I would end. Okay, so that means really when you finish this, none of that stuff will be there, including that. That's it. Now, if they say, well, what is the actual sum? Well, then you know that it would be -6. It's just, once again, the number lines, it may be helpful to see this in terms of direction. It's just, it's almost never failed in the past to confuse more people than it helps. So I am cautious when using it. There we go, 3.2. Adding integers, we should be able to add with negatives and positives. Bam.